welcome both United States Senators, Senator Cornyn as well as Senator Cruz, to the city of Houston.
That was for the chief.
Specifically right here, all of them, they're quite familiar with the city and quite familiar with City Hall, and we've all partnered. I've partnered with them on so many different moments and occasions. So let me just say thank you both for being here. Let me do this because we got a number of people, and this is one of those sessions, roundtable, where we kind of hear and listen from one another. This will be one of a few that I will be having today, on Juneteenth. So I want to welcome everyone here. And then Senator Cornyn, Senator Cruz, just for your edification, let me just indicate who's here, at least acknowledge them. Chief Art Acevedo, of course, Chief of the Houston Police Department, State Senator John Whitmire. I think there's a representative from the Sheriff's Department. This is Sheriff Ed Gonzalez. Is he? Oh, that's right. He's at the funeral this morning. Okay. His office is being represented. The Harris County District Attorney, Kim Mark, is here. The Mayor Pro Tem, Dave Martin, is here. Councilwoman Abby Kamen, who's Chair of Public Safety, Homeland Security, is here. Ray Hunt with the Houston Police Officers Union is here. Gerald Bernberg, who sits on the Independent Police Oversight Board, is present. Who else do I have over there? I'm trying to look at people. Councilmember Tiffany Thomas is on her way. Johnny Mata is here with the Greater Houston Coalition for Justice. Leonard Kincaid of the Houston Recovery Initiative is present. Bishop James Dixon, who is the first vice president of the NAACP, as well as the pastor of Community of Faith, is President Judson Robinson, who is head of the Houston Area Urban League, is present. And did I leave off anyone? Oh, Mark Carter, who's a former state district judge, who's also on the Board of Regents of Texas Southern University, is here, and was the one instrumental in bringing about the Veterans Court that has been so successful in the county, is present. So let me thank all of you for being present. Let me stop here and then turn it over. Senator Cornyn asked for this roundtable. Let me acknowledge that from the very beginning. Senator Cornyn asked for this roundtable to have a discussion on issues that are critically important right now, not just in Houston, but across the country. So let me start off. Senator Cornyn, the floor is yours.
Well, Mayor, thank you very much for your responsiveness. I called the mayor on a Saturday a couple weeks ago, and I said, I really would like to ask for your help convening a group of people who are leaders in the community who can help advise Senator Cruz and myself and Congress generally on what you think the appropriate federal response would be to the terrible killing of Mr. Floyd, as well as others, as we now know. But let me first start by saying, Mayor, thank you for having this discussion on Juneteenth. It has special relevance here in Texas. Obviously, we know the history. Senator Cruz and I introduced a resolution in the Senate this week recognizing the significance of the day, and that's right here behind us. It's amazing how many people don't know what Juneteenth is. But in order to fix that problem, on Monday, when we get back in session, I plan to introduce a bill that will make Juneteenth a federal holiday. We've done that. We did that 40 years ago in Texas, and it's time, I think, to educate the greater public about our history, and as we try to learn from it. When I talked to Rodney Floyd before the funeral here in Houston, he, of course, reminded me that they're Texans. And I said, well, I knew that. And he said, well, Senator, we want some Texas-sized justice. And I said, Mr. Floyd, to the best of my ability, we will try to deliver on that request. What you will expect to see next in Washington will be next week, Senator Cruz and I and others will be who've been working on something called the Justice Act with our colleague Tim Scott, is designed to try to provide some of that justice. And let me just point out that there are other bills, including the ones in the House, but as you look at them, they're about 70% overlap. And so there's plenty of common ground here, including in the bill, the Justice Act, there's an anti-lynching law that finally get passed at the federal level that's been hung up, and a National Criminal Justice Commission appointed, something that Chief Acevedo, as the head of the major city chiefs organizations, has endorsed. The NAACP, the Urban League, had endorsed this. This is a bipartisan 9/11 type commission. Be 18 people who will report back to Congress within 14 people report back within 18 months with their recommendations. So I know there's a sense of urgency to do something right now, and we need to do everything we can do. But I just want to assure you that there's a lot of common ground and goodwill here, and I think a unique opportunity to do what I also told the Floyd family, and that is, out of every tragedy, what I look for is there something good that will come out of it? And I think there just might be in some of the work we're doing here today and doing together. So thank you, Mayor, for being so responsive, for being my friend. And we worked together on a lot of different things over the years, but I can't think of anything that's as important right now than this. So thank you.
Thank you, Senator Cornyn. Senator Cruz.
Well, thank you, Mayor. Thank you for hosting this, and thank you for your leadership, especially during these challenging times. John, thank you for your hard work and your leadership as well. You know, all of us know this year, the last several months have been extraordinary. That what we're facing, none of us have ever faced a confluence of challenges like this before. We're all dealing with a global pandemic, discovering modern mask chic, which has changed how every one of us lives our lives. We're also facing economic challenges on the order of the Great Depression. 44 million Americans who've lost their jobs. None of us have seen economic challenges like this in our lifetimes. And just when we thought that those two national disasters weren't enough, we have seen enormous racial divisions really pulling at the fabric of this country. It was obviously triggered with the horrific killing of George Floyd, a Houstonian. And in the immediate aftermath of Mr. Floyd's killing, I will say it was encouraging the unanimity with which everyone condemned what happened. Across the political spectrum, every observer who watched those 8 minutes and 46 seconds with the officer's knee on Mr. Floyd's neck, it was indefensible. There was no law enforcement justification for a man who was handcuffed and incapacitated and begging for his life. We were all horrified at what happened. And that's a call for reform. That's a call for all of us together to look at ways to make sure that our justice system is more fair, that we are providing equal justice under the law, that we're protecting everyone regardless of skin color. We saw then in the aftermath of that, protests across the country, people exercising the First Amendment right to speak out at the injustice. And then sadly, in some of the protests, we saw violent criminals really taking advantage of and exploiting those protests and using them as an excuse to engage in acts of violence and destruction, and in too many instances, murdering police officers across the country. And, you know, I will say I was proud of Houston. Houston's my hometown. I love this city. I was proud of Houston, of how we have dealt with each of these crises. On coronavirus, I think we have been smart. We've been proactive. We've managed to keep the numbers far more under control than many other parts of the country. On the economy, I think we've also been smart trying to lean in and help businesses reopen. And when it came to the racial divisions and the anger, we saw a lot of free speech here. But thankfully, we did not see nearly as much violence as some other parts of the country saw. And that's a testament, Chief, to our police officers. It's a testament, Mayor, to our community, to who we are, that people engaged in speech but didn't take it to the next level of violent destruction. And my hope is we use this moment of time, this moment of enormous challenges, to step forward with good, reasonable, common sense solutions. I think the mayor has done a good job looking at issues here in Houston and trying to adopt policies, use of force policies that make sense. Nationally, John Cornyn and I are working together along with our colleague Tim Scott on the Justice Act that's designed to do a whole lot of things, including creating a national database so that if you have an officer with severe disciplinary problems who keeps getting in trouble over and over and over again, and that officer is applying at a different agency, that the agency will get access to those records, to see those disciplinary records so that you know if you've got someone who's got a problem disciplinary history that they're not just going to be able to move from one agency to another. Another important element of the Justice Act is body cameras and creating strong incentives for body cameras to be worn. I look at body cameras a little bit like criminal technology such as fingerprints or DNA. That as each of them were introduced, it moved us closer to truth. If you have an officer who's breaking the law, who's committing a crime, and I am glad that the officers in Minneapolis are being charged for what happened to George Floyd. But if you have someone breaking the law, you want that video to have that evidence to know what they did and to hold them accountable. And one would hope also the body camera is also a disincentive to anyone breaking the law. But at the same time, if you have an officer who's falsely accused, that body camera can prove the very best friend that officer can have. Because if their conduct, as the vast majority of officers' conduct was consistent with law, then that body camera can exonerate them. And so I think for all of us, we want to have a record. George Floyd, tragically, had there not been a video, I think it is likely no one in this room would know Mr. Floyd's name. It is only that video that made people realize the horror of what happened. And so I think having videos is important. Let me just say finally, in reforming the system, in putting in place steps to ensure people's lives are protected and protected fairly and equally without regard to skin color. And that is a critically important imperative of justice, especially today on Juneteenth, of all days. We also need to make sure not to give in, I believe, to some of the angry voices that are just demonizing police. Houston, we have an incredible police force, and I believe the vast majority of officers step up to serve because they love their community and they want to keep people safe, they want to protect people. And it is easy for this debate to turn into police are the bad guys. And that's harmful. That is harmful not only to law enforcement, but it's harmful to our communities. And so I have great optimism. Houston is a problem-solving community. Houston is a city where common sense, where we work together. And so I'm grateful for this roundtable to hear from leaders around the table and discuss these difficult but really important questions.
Thank you, Senator. Let me just make a few comments, and then we're going to go around the table. I'm going to ask people if they would be succinct in their comments, try to do it within like 3 minutes, because we have a number of speakers that are present, but to provide ideas to both of these senators. And I see we are joined also by Congresswoman Sheila Jackson-Lee as well, so it's good to see her here. We're in her congressional district. Let me just say this as the mayor of the city. As both chambers to move forward on their bills, please listen to the mayor's around this country. Because regardless of what takes place in D.C., in the end, we are the ones that's going to be the closest to the people and have the responsibility of effectuating those changes, whatever those changes may end up being. I will say to you that in this city, we have an incredible community. It is the most diverse city in the world. But I will tell you, in many of the communities and neighborhoods, there is a lot of frustration, and there is a lot of anger, and there is where people are feeling as though over the decades they have been overlooked, because when you look into their communities and their neighborhoods, they just don't see the investments taking place in their communities and their neighborhoods. What they do see is the investments, for example, in law enforcement, but not necessarily in their communities. I would say to you that we asked our police officers to do way too much. Way too much. We asked them to police, we asked them to be the social workers, we asked them to go out on crisis intervention, we asked them to deal with the homeless, we asked them to deal with domestic abuse and violence. We asked our police officers to do way too much. And so their presence in our community is quite a bit, but we have asked them to do that because in large part, that's where the resources have been directed. And that's unfair to our police officers, it's unfair to the people themselves. Having said that, this is what I would suggest. Provide resources, for example, for substance abuse treatment programs, okay? Because they're having to interface with them. And so provide particular grants for substance abuse and treatment. Provide particular resources, for example, for crisis intervention, so that we don't have to rely on classified, but we can utilize other health medical professionals to do what we are asking our police officers to do, but we don't have the resources by which to do it. Provide special grants for domestic violence intervention. Those things are important. Grants to incentivize officers to live within the city of Houston would also be very important, because 65 to 70% live outside of the city of Houston. And so you're asking police officers who, in large part, living outside the city of Houston to police within the city of Houston, especially for police officers, for example, who have come up and reared in many of these communities, and they want to stay in these communities, but the resources are not available for them to do that. So it's hard to kind of, in many ways, when you have 65 to 70 outside, we need to take a look. We need to take a look at that. It is important to listen to those who have marched, protested, and demonstrated. And that's the lesson that we're all learning, that it's important to listen. And people want to see transformational action. You know, they don't want to necessarily hear from the rhetoric from us anymore. They want the transformational steps. And this is one of those special moments in time. So let me tell you what we've done already in the city of Houston within the executive order that I put forth, that most of the members of city council members signed on to, requiring the right to intervene. Police officers see something that's against policy, that's wrong, they have a right to intervene. Requiring the right to de-escalate, to exhaust all reasonable alternatives, to issue a verbal warning where possible before utilizing deadly force, to report all use of deadly force, to ban chokeholds, no not warrants except approved by the chief of police or his designee. And in many ways, I think what Ray Hunt would tell you is that many of these things officers were doing already, but these are the policies now of the city of Houston. But let me tell you, it can be the policies of the city of Houston, but the city of Houston police and community, we are judged by what happens in Minneapolis and Atlanta, in any other city. So regardless of what we do here, if, for example, something takes place in some other city, in some other state, we are then judged by what took place there. So regardless of what we do with our policies in the city of Houston, unless they become a national sort of policy, then the good that is done here is somewhat minimized by what's seen across the board, across the country. And that's important. People want accountability. They want good policing. And let me tell you, people value their police. They need police. We all need police. And police and community need to be on the same page, working together on the same team, moving in the same direction. So the steps, the things that I'm recommending here, they're good for police. We got a lot of good police officers. I work with them and deal with them every day. Proud of them, okay? But they are being asked to do way too much, and it's unfair to them, and it's unfair to the community for which they serve. So let's find ways of making sure that on the things that they are having to address, we can hand that baton off to some others who are in a much better position to do it than just classified police officers, and let them do what they do best. So that's important. It's important to end racial bias. That's important. This is Juneteenth, okay? And quite frankly, the spirit of Juneteenth needs to be every day, okay? And these are the initial steps. It's not the ending, it's the beginning in this process, putting forth the mayor's task force on policing reform. So it's not the end, it's the beginning, but it's important for all of us to listen and act. And then lastly, what I would say, let me encourage the House and the Senate in the most respectful and humblest way that I can to act quickly and transformationally, and to do it as soon as possible. The recommendations that for my task force, I said, come back within 60 to 90 days, okay? That's important. But this is one of those times, more than anything else, what our country is needing is that they're needing that unifying moment at the highest level, House and Senate, and saying Black Lives Matter. We have to recognize that people of color, communities have been overlooked for a long time. It is important to lift them up, and it's important to take the burden off of, in this case, 5,300 police officers who are doing the best they can, but they are simply being asked to do way too much, and it's unfair. And I think it's our burden as policymakers and legislators to ease that burden and place those responsibilities where they rightfully belong. And I think if we do that, we'll have a much safer and much positive community. Now, having said that, let me yield. We're going to start off with Chief Acevedo, and then we'll go around each one of you. And if you can do it, provide meaningful suggestions in about 3 minutes, I think that would be helpful. Chief Acevedo.
Good morning, Mayor, Senators, Congresswoman, Senator, and all our distinguished guests and elected officials, DA. You know, it's such a privilege to be here right now, and we are seeing this from the Major State Chief's perspective as a tremendous opportunity to affect change, and we're very hopeful that the things that we've been talking about, both labor and management, leadership across the nation, about the issues that we face every day because of the lack of places to take people that are in psychological distress or addicted or homeless. But there is a word of caution, Mayor, that I think we have to put on the table. An analogy that a friend of mine who's the commissioner of police in Baltimore, you know, for good or wrong or indifferent, the police, in fact, we are the first responders on social issues. It's not by design, but it's by the need of this community. We can't cut our resource and our ability to respond before we build the infrastructure and the resources we need to take the place of the police. So I would just say that his analogy was, when you have an old stadium or an old model, you don't tear down that stadium and stop using it until you build the new state-of-the-art stadium. So it's really important as we move forward. We're going to support. I want to tell the senators and the Congresswoman, thank you all for your leadership. There's a much more that both sides of the aisle agree on the Justice Act than they disagree on. The police chiefs, and myself personally, with the support of Mayor Turner, we look forward to actually being the voice for these young people. Senators, we spent hours marching, engaging, and sometimes getting yelled at, but actually listening to one another. And we made a promise to the Floyd family and to our young people of color. We will be their voice as police chiefs, and we will report back with the mayor's support who did what, who supported what, because I think transparency has to go beyond just the police. We're pretty much under the microscope. It has to include the criminal justice system, including the courts, the DA's office, the judges, probation, parole, and everyone else. So transparency needs to continue, and I look forward to this conversation.
You can hold that mic. There's Hudson is given a portable mic. Oh, he'll get it around. And then let me acknowledge Councilmember David Robinson, who is here. Appreciate you. And then the representative from LULAC is also present. So thank you. Senator John Whitmire. And Chief Acevedo, you were excellent in your time. So thank you. Senator John Woodmeyer, the Dean.
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you and Senator Cornyn for bringing us together. There's a lot of firepower around this table, and I would emphasize, as you've already mentioned, there's no visiting team, no home team. We're all in this together at each level of government, not to mention in our community. I'd like to emphasize that criminal justice is a system, as you've mentioned, and it's not going to be solved by just police reform. It's going to be at the area of incarceration, prosecution. Each element is so critical, and if you have a weakness in one of these segments, it'll show up throughout the system. I would like to be brief, but emphasize something that we do not need statutes or congressional action on. If we could have the mayor, as you've given your directives, and chiefs and police unions spread the word today. I would like to do it in Austin, but we're not in session, but I think we can do it with an agreement. We need to minimize contact that the public has with the police. Police ought to be used against individuals that we're afraid of, not that we're mad at. And I'm examining Class C misdemeanors, drilling down on the municipalities around this state that have the authority to pass Class C misdemeanors. We've got to quit stopping people for not using their turn signal. Sandra Bland tragedy. Mr. Ambler in Williamson County, not blinking his light. Mr. Floyd not submitting an accurate $20 bill, allegedly. If we would just minimize police contact with individuals that have perhaps gotten our attention, made us mad, save those resources for violent offenders, we could do that today, living here today, with the instructions to police departments and activists and DAs and judges. Minimize the contact. Use those resources for dangerous situations. No ever again for somebody sleeping in a car that could be talked and discussed and perhaps even given a ride home. If we would make that change and that agreement today, we will have done a great project today. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Senator. Mike Lee, the Major of the Harris County Sheriff Department, on behalf of Sheriff Ed Gonzalez.
Good morning. Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Senator Cornyn, and thank you, Senator Cruz, for inviting the Harris County Sheriff's Office to be part of this. Sheriff Gonzalez does send his regards and his regrets for not being able to be here this morning, but at this very moment, he's speaking at the funeral of Deputy Juan Menchaca, our second Harris County deputy to die from the COVID-19. Those of you that know Sheriff Gonzalez know that he's committed to transparency and reform of our criminal justice system, and more importantly, not only committed, we are ready to not only listen, but act on any of the police reform recommendations coming down from these meetings. And those of you that know me, some of you in this room do, know that brevity of speech is usually not one of my traits, but during this time that we are in, I think it's very important that we as law enforcement do a lot less of the talking and a lot more of the listening, and listening with our ears, and listening with an open mind, and listening with an open heart, with compassion and empathy for all of our fellow human beings. Let me close by saying that all of us have a role in ensuring that law enforcement policing practices in our country respect and protect the civil and human rights of all persons, and that every police agency in this country needs to take a close look at their policies, their practices, their procedures, and look for any opportunities where those can be changed that could result in reductions in uses of force. Our policies and practices must deliver fairness, equity, procedural justice, transparency, and accountability. Furthermore, every one of us that wear the badge must acknowledge that ultimately we are accountable to the very communities that we swore to serve and protect. Thank you.
Thanks, Major. Harris County District Attorney Kim Ogg.
Mayor, thank you for this privilege of speaking to the senators from Texas, our Congresswoman Sheila Jackson Lee, and my esteemed colleagues. There are several things that can be done immediately to aid prosecutors in our job of applying justice and laws equally, not just to civilians, but to police who engage in misconduct that is criminal. The notion of public safety has to include crimes against public trust, and that's what we're talking about. I agree with you. Most police officers are extremely dedicated to their fellow man. And it's an imperfect profession, just like the law. So when it comes to suggestions, there are 4 that I have immediately. The first is police misconduct records. Because of Brady, a case that requires us to disclose favorable evidence to the defense, and because of the Michael Morton Act in Texas, which was supported and to a large degree pushed through by Senator Whitmire, we have an obligation to tell the defense what we may not know, the disciplinary records of a police officer. Let me compliment Chief Acevedo, a great leader here in Houston, who was the first to sign an MOU to agree to give us at the DA's office immediate access to disciplinary records. Unfortunately, we have 86 agencies in Harris County that I serve, law enforcement agencies, and serve with, some of whom do not send us their disciplinary records by agreement. We have to subpoena them. This takes a lot of time and effort, and it's really for naught. The county agencies in particular need to get on board. Body cams. I was here to testify in front of City Council several years ago when body cams were being introduced. The idea was that this was going to be the pivotal moment in addressing police shootings. But unfortunately, through lack of uniform policies or laws related to the type of body cams, how officers must wear body cams, when they must wear it, when they can turn it off, this lack of uniformity has created a myriad of policy conflicts just here in Harris County, where our agencies have different rules about who has to do what when. Again, one other lack of uniformity, the systems that the agencies utilize are not uniform, and there was not a lot of effort to ensure the ability of the DA's office to synthesize all those different systems, so they were purchased without their partners' acquiescence, us, and they were purchased at different times by different agencies. So you have all of these systems that create a timeliness problem when it comes to delivering evidence to us, because police perform the initial investigations of crime in our country and in our city. And when we can't get body cam footage for months and months and months because of either inadequate funding for staffing to deliver or technology that isn't interconnected, then it delays justice. This frustrates people, and it harms and erodes the public trust, and it must change. We have different rules for federal law enforcement than local law enforcement when it comes to internal policies about how to respond to shootings. The Houston Police Department and local agencies have a policy where they require officers to give a statement. They allow our team to come out and supervise or at least oversee and give an objective oversight role when it comes to the collection of evidence. Federal agencies do not. We've had a shooting here in Houston involving a federal, Harris County involving a federal officer where a hostage was killed. When we get to the scene, it's all cleaned up. The officers are gone. That required Chief Acevedo to initiate an investigation of another agency. This is difficult to prosecute. It's wildly difficult when it comes to our relationships with one another. Finally, legislation. We need stronger laws in Texas in terms of police misconduct and accountability. We need uniformity in the delivery of misconduct records, and we need laws that incorporate a violation of civil rights. For me to charge an officer with murder is extraordinarily rare and difficult. We were some of the first in the country to do it with former Officer Gerald Goins. You can see other agencies following, but the United States attorneys have the ability to simply prosecute an officer for violation of civil rights. This is, as Senator Cornyn would know, an easier standard. And finally, funding. If you believe in criminal justice reform, you must fund it. And so in the face of defunding moments, I will tell you that with 360 lawyers to deal with 75,000 cases in Harris County without a courthouse to do it in that won't flood, it's very difficult to ensure timely justice. And I understand the public's desire for timely justice.
Thank you. Mayor Pro Tem Dave Martin.
Thank you, Mayor, and Senator Cornyn, Senator Cruz, and Representative Sheila Jackson-Lee. Thank you. I think I have a unique perspective, not only as Mayor Pro Tem working with Mayor Turner on a daily basis, but as a white Republican in a predominant city made up of black and brown Democrats, working with Mayor Turner every day. A week ago Wednesday, we passed unanimously our budget, our operating budget for fiscal year 2021, with a growing concern and protests outside our door on defunding police. And when you talk to people about what is defunding police, you'll get a different definition from every individual that you talk with. But I think, Senator Cruz, to use your words, I think there is a call for reform. We need to do police differently in the future than we do today. So if you look around the city of Houston and then you compare us to the rest of the United States, I'll go through cities like Washington, D.C., Minneapolis, and then the top 6 cities in the United States: New York, L.A., Chicago, Houston, Phoenix, Philadelphia. There was only one city that didn't have any issues with people burning buildings and looting, and that's the city of Houston. And I will disagree with the recommendation that Mayor Turner made about talking to the mayors. I think you need to talk to one specific mayor, because the reason why we had no issues was because of the main attribute this man has, and that's leadership. Leadership and a tone from the top. We had no issues because of Mayor Turner's 24/7, 365-day involvement in this process. So I've been watching Fox News a lot. I watched Senator Scott, and I think he's a brilliant man. And I think people in the United States are tired of committees, they're tired of hearings, they want action. So I'm looking forward to what the Justice Act looks like. And I beg you to talk with Mayor Turner, because he's the one that had ideas. We had a unanimous vote with people of all races, all creeds, all political affiliations. And that was a tough thing to do, because we had a lot of pressure on defunding police, whatever that looks like. So look around the United States and see who has the model for how you run a city with the problems that we have in 2020 and moving forward. And please listen to Mayor Turner, invite him to be a part of the process, because I think he has some great answers. And I'm proud to work in the city of Houston every day, and I'm proud to work with him. We may look different, we may have different political ideology, but I think we pull in the same direction. And I think that's what we need, not only in the federal government, in the state government, and the local government, but throughout the United States. So God bless, and thanks for being here.
Thanks, Mayor Pro Tem. Councilmember Abby Kamen.
Thank you, Mayor, and I echo our Mayor Pro Tem's remarks as well. I think Houston has led the way and is exemplary, and we are doing, by and large, the right things for our communities right now. And there's a long way to go, and we have room for improvement. I know we can all agree that it's not just 8 minutes and 46 seconds. It's hundreds, if not thousands of minutes of I can't breathe. And that those systemic issues, I think we have a tremendous opportunity through legislation to address. And my recommendations, just to be clear, some are because of the leadership of HPD in this city, so my recommendations are not necessarily directed at them, because we are doing a lot of the right things. I think with the Justice Act, there is room where we can require and incentivize the reporting of hate crimes for every law enforcement jurisdiction in this country. HPD reports hate crimes to the FBI. Other jurisdictions in our area do not. We also need hate crimes training and incentives and funding for that. I think it's important through this legislation to address language that prohibits the use of force. I do believe, and many in the community believe, that the definition currently is problematic. The definition, my understanding in the act, is for purpose of incapacitation, and that needs to be looked at. Councilmember Thomas is not here yet, but one thing that she raised that I think it's really important, y'all are addressing information sharing in the interview process to make sure that officers who have been disciplined previously in other departments, that information is known. But there's also a loophole. If a candidate is not hired, they fail psych evaluations, they're flagging of those issues, that information also is not shared with other departments, and that needs to be addressed as well. There's been a lot of talk about body cameras. We desperately need the funding for that. HPD has been trying and looking for grants to improve our technology that limits the use of user error. So that funding is greatly appreciated. But if we're going to talk about body cameras, because those policies have been in place for years in our area, rates of use of force and other issues still have not decreased. So I think it's body cameras and we need to be looking at how we hold officers accountable, and there's nothing regarding the intent language for prosecution. I'm not necessarily saying get rid of qualified immunity with a broad brush, but we do need to look at the standards in which we can hold bad cops accountable. As the mayor said, the funding for crisis diversion and intervention, mental health and homelessness, none of this is going to get fixed without that funding for our local municipalities and our states to address those issues in our community. So we appreciate your advocacy on the federal level to get us those resources so that we can do that. And finally, while this isn't addressed in the Justice Act, I think that without real meaningful reform on gun violence that puts officers in danger and our communities in danger, we are going to continue to see these issues because officers are on the streets every single day dealing and trying to respond to this. We have to get guns off the street that should not be there, that were acquired illegally. But again, we're putting our communities, our children, and our police officers at risk when we're not tackling that issue as well.
Thank you. Ray Hunt.
First of all, I'll use that one, I guess. First of all, I want to thank Senators Cornyn and Cruz for having this today, and Mayor, thank you for inviting me to be part of this as well. Just want to briefly touch on the 4 segments that we talked about here on this Justice Act and let you know where we as the Houston Police Officers Union stand. The first part, we fully support de-escalation training. We also think it should be federal standardized. We think every department should be doing the same thing on de-escalation. It should come from your leadership at the very top in the federal government. As far as the hiring of persons and not getting disciplinary records, I would say that any agency that's not getting those records is probably not doing their job. I can assure you that any person that comes to the Houston Police Department from another agency and wants to look at a previous officer's disciplinary records, they are released to that agency and they know exactly what's going on, and we'll actually have a one-on-one conversation with them as well. As far as accountability goes on the body cameras, as you probably know, the Houston Police Officers Union fully supported body cameras when this was first introduced. People thought we were nuts for doing it. Some of our members didn't like the fact that we were doing it, but we believed that it was going to clear most officers, and it does. I will say this, without grants from the federal government, municipal governments are going to have, especially here in Houston, we're under property cap, you're going to have inferior products if you can't get the very best. It's unfair to the officer out there who does not have the very best body camera out there to show exactly what's going on whenever that officer makes a split-second decision on life and death. So I would ask that the federal government consider giving substantial grants and making sure that for body cameras and making sure that we can get the very best product possible. I also would say this, especially for DAOG here. We know that right now we can do a policy that says that with accountability and transparency, right now the Houston Police Department, while an officer is talking to the DA on the phone at intake, they're having to push their button to mute the conversation with the district attorney's office. We do not want that to continue happening. We want that conversation to be recorded. There's no reason why it can't be recorded. People talk about attorney-client privilege, that kind of mess, but I completely disagree. And our members want those conversations between the assistant district attorneys taking that intake call and the officer on the scene. We get officers dinged all the time for failing to mute their body camera. It's ridiculous. We should have it all recorded. Transparency. As far as reporting, anytime an officer is involved in a shooting, we have absolutely no problem with that. I'd be stunned if we're not already doing that, but if we're not, we definitely should be doing that. As far as no-knock warrants, always hated no-knock warrants. Think they should only be used in extreme hostage situations where you can't risk somebody being killed if you knock on the door and say police or something like that. But as far as no-knock warrants, we fully supported the mayor in saying that it had to come from the chief of police or his designee before you could do a no-knock warrant. As far as the additional steps, the lynching of federal crime, been a police officer 30 years, done lots of hanging calls. Thankfully, I've never had to do one that was a homicide, but if that's happening somewhere, absolutely, I'd like for it to be a federal crime as well. However, I think, as Senator Whitmire would say, that they might get more punishment in the state jail than they would in the federal jail because they're a little bit different facilities as far as air conditioning and everything else. So I'm not sure it's not best to do it on the state level, but you're the smarter persons than I am, so if y'all want to do it on the federal level, that's great. No one should be lynched definitely as a homicide. I want to end by saying this, that in the 30 years I've been a police officer, lots of times we see videos, and I deal with lots of conversations with police officers, and I've never had a situation where the officers have said, this is overwhelmingly should not have been done. There's always half that say, I would have done it this way. Yeah, he was probably acting right. No police officer who I have talked to have justified what took place in Minneapolis. None. And that's very, very rare. Georgia's a different story. We had lots of people saying different things. But this one, 8 minutes and 46 seconds with a handcuffed person, you got the knee on the, there's no justification for it. Those 4 officers, especially the 2, but the 4 officers who were involved in this did not have to go through what 800,000 of us had to go through during these protests. The spitting in your face, the calling you names that you can't even say, some that I didn't even heard of before. And I'm not talking about from 95% of the protesters. I'm talking about from that 5% of problems of every race that we have to deal with on a daily basis. So I just want to applaud those 800,000 officers out there who did not do this to Mr. Floyd, are open to any type of thing to make our job better, because we know when the community supports us, it makes us safer out there as well. So thank you all very much for having me. And to end with just saying that as Labor, we 100% support Juneteenth as a national holiday. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Gerald Bernberg.
Thank you, Mayor. I'm here because for the last 6 years I've served as a member of the Houston Independent Police Oversight Board. During that period of time, I participated in the review of several hundred files involving complaints about police officers, and so have that perspective to bring. I also am a civil rights lawyer and have been for close to 50 years now. I've sued the city of Houston. I have represented police officers. I've sued police officers. So I have a long and I've argued these kinds of cases before the U.S. Supreme Court. So I have a long and extensive experience base in this area. I would like to spend much of my time addressing an issue which I haven't heard anybody talk about yet that arises from that background. I've heard folks talk about doing away with qualified immunity, which makes it then easier to make police officers individually liable when they commit unlawful acts. From my perspective, while that's an important and a good thing to do, that's not the issue at all. The real issue is doing something about Monell. Monell is the U.S. Supreme Court decision that basically says, bottom line, the city or other municipality is not liable for the acts of its officers in a federal civil rights lawsuit, which is to say, putting it pretty graphically, that if the incident involving Mr. Floyd happened here in Houston, Texas, there is nothing the family could do to obtain a collectible judgment in that case, and the reason is because Monell says that in order to bring a viable lawsuit to redress or vindicate a violation of rights, in order to get to the municipality, to the city, there is no respondeat superior. I know that's a legal term, but I also know these 2 senators are very familiar with it. There is in my business, by the way, heading my individual law firm. Instead of that, you have to prove that the stepping on the throat was part of an official policy of the city of Houston. And if you can't prove that official policy, you've got no lawsuit. Now, you can sue the individual officer. And assuming you get by the qualified immunity, you can get a judgment against an individual officer. What good's that going to do you? Amongst other things, the place that you can deter this conduct, the place that you can make sure that we have adequate supervision, adequate training, adequate hiring, all of that is at the city level. It's not at the individual police officer level. In the city of Houston, the police officers, they're not insured, by the way. What that means is you get a judgment against an officer, it's uncollectible. There's absolutely nothing you can do about it. So What I want to suggest is that the senators commission someone taking a look at the possibility of amending the Monell rule, because I think that is how we can affect conduct, is if we can get the municipalities to share some responsibility in that regard. Alternatively, or not even alternatively, but additionally, I would suggest that your legislation somehow or another encourage cities to have insurance for its officers so that people who are victims of unconstitutional conduct have some form of redress and compensation. Very quickly, then, I want to move on to some things that I've seen from
Jerry,
the iPod.
Move very quickly, Jerry.
All right, BWCs, they are, as the Senator said, the law enforcement officers' best friends, must be encouraged, but the technology must be improved. And I would ask that we take another look at pain compliance as a justification for police abuse. Many of the cases we see, why were you standing on his throat? I was just trying to achieve compliance through pain. We're taught pain compliance. The intentional infliction of pain on individuals is something we need to take another look at societally. So thank you very much, Mayor.
Thank you, Gerald. Leonard Kincaid. Executive Director of the Houston Recovery Initiative.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Senator Cornyn. Thank you, Senator Cruz, and respect to our Congresswoman Sheila Jackson Lee. I'd like to thank you for the invitation that you extended to me. Today, I am speaking as a voice for the recovery community. Although I'm not in recovery myself, with full disclosure, I've worked in this field for over 30 years. And Senator Cruz, I'd like to just thank you for acknowledging the fact that the city of Houston is a problem-solving community. You know, one of the challenges that often law enforcement is presented with is to have to convene on individuals that are under the influence of substances or have a mental health issue. It is one of the driving causes that cause law enforcement to have to come in contact with citizens. And one of the things that we understand is that quite often law enforcement is stuck in a default situation where they're having to respond to these kinds of circumstances, when quite often they may be ill-equipped to deal with the circumstances in the moment. And so one of the things that, in response to what you said, Senator Cruz, about the city being a problem-solving community, is the amount of programming that is across our entire criminal justice system in the city of Houston and Harris County. Starting with a jail diversion program that the mayor funds, and the program was actually created out of the mayor's office to serve as a diversion site for individuals arrested for public intoxication. That program has allowed us to achieve a 95% reduction in individuals going to jail for public intoxication. We also enjoy over a 95% approval rating from the police officers that we serve. And so that is just an example of the creativity and innovation that's available to a community when you start getting outside of the box. But way beyond that is the work that's being done in the Harris County system, starting with jail diversion programs for mental health that was recently started in this community, jail diversion programs that's ran through a number of our courts, even programs inside of our jail. As you probably know, Harris County Jail runs the largest mental health institution in the state of Texas. But what you may not know is that they also run a really robust treatment program inside of that system as well. Now, the problem is when individuals leave that system, quite often they don't have resources in the community that they can be handed off to. So the gains that's realized while they're inside of those institutions are often lost when they return to the community. And so, in addition to that, even the adult probation system has substance abuse treatment programs and recovery support services attached to their intervention. And so all of these programs are available to us in this community. In addition to that, the City of Houston Health Department run a prison reentry program. And the thing that all these programs have in common, as successful as we are, is that we are all very much underfunded. And the services that we need for the downstream, once those people go through our service system and then they're ready to reintegrate into the community, the services necessary to help us capitalize on the gains that we made when we put them through these programs in these institutions, we lose those gains when we turn those people to the community because we simply do not have the support sufficient to support them as they try to reintegrate back into the community. And so my only request is that you look at funding for these downstream services so that the interventions that are made in these systems can be realized as these individuals return to the community. And I'm just not asking for funding for the sake of funding. I'm asking you to set up systems where you screen where you want to put the money. Because I think a lot of these programs can demonstrate their efficiency and their effectiveness. We got some state-of-the-art programs being ran. One is funded by the city. One that I'm familiar with is funded by the county. And each one of those programs have the data to demonstrate what I'm saying, the effectiveness of what we're doing and the gains that we realize, and oftentimes the loss of those gains because we simply do not have funding to support the downstream services necessary to maintain that behavior change. Thank you.
Thank you, Leonard. And I cannot underscore the importance of that. If you want to reduce the police contacts and put them in a dangerous situation, these programs must be funded. And just this week, we were told by the state, TDCJ, that our reentry program is being cut because of the funding shortage. When you got 12 to 13,000 people that are returning from TDCJ every year to Houston Harris County. If you don't provide opportunities and address the things that Leonard was talking about, you're putting them on a collision course with police, and you're putting police at a disadvantage. So if you want to help police, you have to fund the initiatives that I think you're about to hear from Leonard and from others. Justin Robinson, head of the Houston Urban League, that we work very closely with. Justin.
Thank you, Mayor, and good morning. I want to welcome the senators to Houston. Typically around this time of year, we're visiting you with the Legislative Policy Conference, and you've both hosted me and my delegation in your offices, and I thank you for listening. And I think listening is really the key word that we're all trying to stress right now in this country. So, to my esteemed Congresswoman and other dignitaries and leaders around the table, gentlemen, we have a watershed moment in history at our doorstep, and you, as our elected representatives, are in power. You have the opportunity to show that you are listening to the voices of the people. You have the opportunity to show empathy and demonstrate you have heard them say, I can't breathe. I deserve justice, fairness, and equity. The Urban League has fought for this simple American promise for more than 100 years. And the time is now. Now, while you're in the seats of history. I represent one of 90 Urban League affiliates that has adopted a 10-point plan that addresses the interventions required that will demonstrate you have heard and acted upon the demands of the African American community and people across the nation that are speaking out against injustice in America. I speak today from my personal experience and my role in this community as a black husband, as a black father, and as one who speaks on behalf of those who would never get the opportunity to be heard by leaders like you. That we have faith and always have had faith in America, the Constitution, and our journey to be a better nation that strives to live the American dream as intended by the founders of our democracy. The 10-point plan was actually written in 2014. There's been some modification to it, but it consists of 1, widespread use of body cameras. 2, review and revision of police use of deadly force policies. 3, comprehensive retraining of all police officers. 4, comprehensive review and strengthening of hiring standards. 5, appointment of special prosecutors to investigate misconduct. 6, mandatory uniform FBI reporting and audit of lethal force incidents. 7, implementation of 21st century policing models. 8, creation and audit of national database of citizen complaints against police. 9, revision of national police accreditation systems for mandatory use by law enforcement for federal funds. 10, national comprehensive anti-racial profiling law. Thank you for your time.
Thanks, Justin. And now, Mark Carter, former judge of the 228th District Court, Harris County. Judge Carter.
Thank you for inviting me to participate in this roundtable discussion on police reform. I'll start by saying I support all the efforts finding solutions because our country is being torn apart. I see police reform as a subset of criminal justice reform, so I don't think we can expect realistic, meaningful change unless we keep the big picture in mind. Criminal justice reform includes police reform, sentencing reform, bond reform, reducing prison populations, and in some cases, decriminalization, such as marijuana. Let's accept the fact that we've created a violent culture in America. There are probably more guns on the streets in America than anywhere else in the world. Concealed, open carry, churches, schools, they're everywhere. Mass shootings are no longer shocking to us, but they're as American as apple pie. The more we put guns on the streets, the more dangerous policing becomes. Police assume everyone is armed, which leads to fatal mistakes and overly aggressive tactics. Citizens fear police, and police fear citizens. We say we're free, but the reality is that we're captives in a state of fear, animosity, and hate. Zero tolerance policing. These are some of the problems that I see. Zero tolerance policing in communities. These tactics are only enforced in communities of color. It drives up arrest rates, negative encounters with police, animosity, and fear. It's aggressive policing against citizens of color and should be abandoned. Federal money awarded to law enforcement agencies that are tied to felony arrest. Agencies typically justify the need for federal funds based on arrest. The more arrests they make, the more federal money they receive. This goes hand in hand with zero tolerance type policies and that incentivize aggressive policing primarily in communities of color. Now, qualified immunity. Police and other government officials should be held to the same standard as everyone else. No more, no less, the same. I'm held responsible for my negligent acts towards other citizens, and I believe police officers simply should be held to the same standard. Now, my ideas moving forward, I think that we tie federal money and incentives. Let's tie federal money and incentivize de-escalation policies and practices. Let's find a way to reward police agencies that have fewer violent encounters with citizens. Let's stop tying federal funds to arrest. Make unlawful any police practice or policy that in its use or implementation is overwhelmingly enforced against communities of color, such as zero tolerance and profiling. Now, let's use federal money to reinvest in youth, education programs in at-risk communities, and in programs for diversion. In closing, this is not something that is going to be solved in a single piece of legislation, just like the 13th Amendment didn't make us equal. We have the longest standing constitution in the planet, whose underlying principles are freedom and equality. So Senator Cornyn and Senator Cruz, you hold a special place in America. And I just want to remind you to fight for equality as hard as you fight for freedom. Thank you.
Thank you. Congresswoman, I'm going to come right back to you. Johnny Mata.
Thank you, Mayor and Senators. I represent the Greater Houston Coalition for Justice. It's an umbrella group of national, state, and local civil rights groups. One of the things that I will say that George Floyd, deplorable death, created an icon that propelled the wind beneath the wind beneath the wings of protest for justice and eliminated, shone a light on systemic police brutality and use of deadly force by police departments throughout America. I would just like to take 1 second that what we do is we deal with systemic change, institutional change. The grand jury in Texas was always, in many cases, stacked against people of color. And out of 288 cases that went before the grand jury on police brutality cases, it was almost zero, maybe one. I'd like to give a salute to Senator Whitmire for leading the charge when we asked for that. I'd like to recognize a progressive district attorney and to a certain extent give some credit for the chief for some egregious cases that went through the criminal justice system. But because those people were poor, did not have a lawyer, it was in the gathering dust in these departments. And it was through that effort that we were able to get justice. And we don't have the time, so I'm just trying to get as much stated. The other, I salute my colleagues on my right, because you already, every time something happens, the world gets excited. We need to change the culture. We need to change the systems. There's a lot of laws in the books, beginning with the color of law, 240, section 242, that deals with what happened to George Floyd. There's the Title VI of the Civil Rights Act that any department, whether it's the police or health department, that gives the courts and the government the power to take away the federal funds. Without federal funds, municipalities and others cannot exist. They would go bankrupt. Here in Houston, we have advocated for independent review board forever. And we have one. Well, it's not working, my friends. And it needs to be removed out of the police department. And whether we need one in the county or in the state, because let me say that a lot of egregious deaths in Harris County, it hasn't just been an HPD. People focus on HPD. HPD has a lot to deal with, to work on. But a county independent review board would go a long way so we wouldn't be holding these meetings. I'm 83 years old, just recovering from leukemia and cancer twice and a heart attack. And I'm here because of the seriousness, because I should be home. But I will tell you, you have an opportunity. We don't need no bickering between parties and trying to outdo one another. The community that demonstrated is not going to go away. It demands justice. I was disappointed when a beautiful, a pretty picture about the police department was being displayed, when we have 8 deaths that are very questionable. One is the Chavez case, Nicholas Chavez, which is now today gone national. And I said, number one, under color of law 242, look at your staffing of the Justice Department Civil Rights Division and the investigations that they go out there and do in the community. Instead, I know that the mayor's nervous, but I will say, the monies can be withheld now, but you need to have the power and the resources to do the investigation. We filed a third party with the Justice Department 5 years ago, and all we get is we're working on it. You know what? Right now, the country is on a cliff. The epidemic, the economy, and police brutality has us on the edge of a cliff. That means we got to wake up. We got to work together along party lines, along everything. That's why I praise my colleagues. NAACP is part of it, and others. And we deal to change, like we did the Justice Department, the grand jury. We want to change more.
Thanks, Johnny. And you have earned the right to be here, and you've earned the right to make everyone nervous. So, not just the
I
mayor.
didn't hear you, Mayor, but that's okay. You and I, we understand ourselves to a certain extent.
Yes, we do. Bishop James Dixon, First Vice President, NAACP. Bishop Dixon.
Thank you, Mayor. Let me first commend you for your leadership. It's been well stated here, but I want to say to our colleagues of both Senators Cornyn and Cruz, thank you for coming. And as it's been stated, the city of Houston has been a solution city, and we maintain stability largely due to the competence of the mayor, the courage of the mayor, and the consensus-building leadership that he provides, which is exemplified in this room today. Honored to be here wearing those 2 hats mentioned, the church as well as the NAACP. And of course, the NAACP is the longest standing social justice organization in America, and the church, of course, is the longest standing faith and moral voice to the nation and the world. I speak for both, hopefully at this time. There are a few things I want to suggest. One, dignify the outcry. Dignify the outcry. When we see cases like the George Floyd case and others that happen numerous around the country, often those who are making outcry are made to feel like the victims, as if the outcry is unwarranted. And then in too many instances, the outcry is supported only by leaders of color and leaders of certain party affiliation. I think that uniting to dignify the outcry would be a great place to start. The press conference today, I think, would be a great place to start. But I think if we could do more of that, what would have happened if there was a press conference held in Minnesota with a coalition of black, white, brown, Republican, Democrats dignifying the outcry? Often we see outcry escalate, as we've seen it in other cities, because the outcry, those who make the outcry don't feel dignified, and it's if they are not justified in the outcry. I think that's a very important step to take, dignify the outcries. Secondly, I do speak along with our colleague Johnny Mata. The NAACP does support the need for an upgrade in terms of a review board that has subpoena power. This has been discussed for decades, and there are always barriers, but we are solutions-oriented city and nation. We believe that that's very, very, very necessary, and so we do support that. The mayor mentioned our police are overtaxed. Mental health is a major issue, and we've got policemen doing mental health work. Our county jail will tell you that a large percentage of the inmates awaiting trial are there due to mental health issues, and they don't get mental health treatment until they're in jail. We do need to fund initiatives and operatives to put people on the streets right in a city today like Houston, going to corner, dealing with people who have mental health issues before they're arrested for criminal trespassing or some of the other nuisance-oriented crimes that they commit, which cost them now months in jail. It taxes our system, overburdens the jail itself, and we got a jail that's a hospital for mental health. I think that's a very important issue that we need to undertake. I do also want to mention, I think training has been mentioned. Screening and training for police officers has to be upgraded. There should be a national standards for recruitment and for training. Background checks of police officers or prospective officers have to be more thorough and more detailed and more granular. And then the training has to be broader and more detailed as well. But a national standards policy coming out of Washington, I think, would be amazingly powerful for police departments to employ. I want to mention this community and cops relations campaign. Someone mentioned, I think you mentioned earlier, Senator Cruz, we do want to protect our communities, but at the same time we want to protect cops. In 1992, there was a song taken off the market called Cop Killer that Ice-T the rapper wrote. I campaigned with local, state, and national law enforcement to help get that song taken off the market, to protect the lives and the dignity of police officers. At the same time, I'm a black man who's been pulled over in my neighborhood multiple times, asked, what are you doing in this community? I've had guns pulled to my head when I was accused of running the stop sign that I didn't run. I'm the same individual who defended cops from Houston to Austin and to the shareholder meeting with Time Warner in California to get that song taken off the market. So I speak legitimately to protecting cops as well as community, but this divide is not wholesome. I'm suggesting that it be a community and cops relations campaign funded out of Washington so that there's a real city-by-city effort to make sure we do rebuild trust through truth, transparency, and through working together. I think such a campaign is much, much needed. My son, who's a pastor's son, who's an A student, is afraid of police. And I'm a friend of police. I'm a friend with the chief. I'm a friend with the sheriffs. But my children are afraid of police to this day. And they've got me as a father. Imagine those who don't have a father who knows a police chief, who's shaking the police chief's hand. So I think we have a very big job to do in correcting that. Finally, I'll say this. We're launching a movement called One Family, One Future. Out of Acts 17:26, of one blood, God created all mankind. We are really one family. Racism is a result of a deception that there are more than one race. There's only one, that's a human race. And we're adopting initiatives to support agendas like the NAACPs and the urban leagues to push legislation forward. One family, one future is what the coalition needs to look like in the U.S. Congress and in the Senate. We need to be working together as opposed to apart. This cannot be a partisan issue. It has to be a one family, one future issue. I got my mask out because I carry my mask. I think it's very important that we unify, as you indicated, and we're here to do that following our mayor. He's a consensus-building mayor. I think it's been suggested this model needs to be lifted across the country, and we stand with him and with you in doing whatever we can to help make change happen. Thank you.
Thank you, Bishop. Congresswoman.
Good morning. Thank you so very much, Mayor. And let me say that this might be one of the most important meetings that are being held at this time in the United States of America, where the representatives of the most powerful democracy in the world, both the House and the Senate, Senator Cruz and Senator Cornyn, are sitting with a House member and listening to the people who govern this nation. So I am a listener this morning, but I do want to express my appreciation for Senator Cruz and Senator Cornyn, each of whom I have worked with on different aspects of service to this community and to this state. I think that is an important point because there is no doubt, with a little bit of humor, Senator Cruz and myself had opposite shirts on, red and blue, during Hurricane Harvey, working together. We will always have that picture for our archives. Senator Cornyn and I have worked to establish a place of history in the Emancipation Trail, and I think we'll be working on some very big announcements today as well on some other introductions. But what I would say is that there is a moment in history that we cannot allow pass. And I would like to call each and every one of your names. The good news is I have had the privilege of working with each and every one. But one name, Johnny Mata, I'm going to have to call, and that is because I humble at his feet, his leadership, his tenure. And I think if we do anything, we'll do in the names of the likes of Johnny Mata and those who've gone on, as we say, to glory. I'm grateful to a mayor that I can cite in Washington, D.C. as the Vice Mayor Pro Tem, and I know that he would welcome me saying to all of the council members who've been in unity around the idea that participatory democracy and protesting is going to work in this community, and people, to the extent we can, and it has been an extension, Mayor. I've seen you extending yourself, and counting heads and checking blocks, and that's been what has been most provocative and important when people see you, and I've tried to have them see us together as we have marched. Chief, we thank you as well, because you have not only been willing to kneel, but you have been willing to hug, but you've been doing it with the understanding of police science. So here are my comments. We will hope to have another roundtable that will present some of the principles that we are operating on out of the House. It will not become law unless we work together. And so I've listened to you today, Mr. Mata. I've listened about a civilian review board with subpoena powers. You'll be glad to know that these are considerations and in legislation that we have. I've listened to Senator Whitmire, which I think is keenly important, and Judge Carter, excellent points, which I think police would welcome, is not the lessening of police, but the lessening of police in interactions that can be handled. Maybe there should be a mediator group that sits alongside of police that can run to circumstances where a storekeeper says, I think this $10 bill is not a legitimate bill. Why did the police have to run to that when a bank could be robbed or a rape could be going on across town? Excellent points that I think we should take into consideration. Banning chokeholds, some of the more harsher ones. And finally, let me say to Brother Hunt that I've known for a very long time, before I do that, I do want to acknowledge the points that the Urban League has put before us. In 2014, this is now 2020, and tragically, the murders of men and women on the streets of our nation has brought us to this point. We should never ignore that, and we should never ignore the fact that there is a question of race. I don't want to, at this meeting, give a litany of statistics that shows that police stops, both pedestrian and traffic, heavily burden people of color and heavily burden African Americans. That's why we're losing lives, and we must acknowledge that we must rid ourselves of racial bias in policing, something that Chief Acevedo has worked very hard on. But Brother Hunt, I want to call you that because we've known each other for a very long time, and I want to make a pronouncement here. I believe that people of color are the most law-abiding people in this nation. And I can document it because our grandmothers, grandfathers, that many of us were raised under, told us how to behave. And we have not steered away from that, but we have been hurt and in pain because of what has occurred in our history. So let's extend that hand. Let's find a federal construct that deals with all that you have said. I have taken it in. We have amendment processes. I know that the senators have because we're here listening. And I believe that we have a pathway to being effective. I want stronger federal laws, but I don't think any of them would harm the excellent understanding of law and order and democracy and equality in this nation and the men and women who wear that uniform. I don't know if Brother Hunt has seen any of us. I think each of us have been to the May 15th memorial almost every year, honoring fallen officers. But at the same time, I've been to almost every funeral of those who have fallen. Most recently, Brother Floyd, and invited to attend the one in Atlanta. But that is not what I want us to be defined by. I know we can do better. And the Urban League has been at the forefront, as well as the NAACP and others. And so I look forward to a roundtable as well, but this has been excellent. I'm very grateful for the mayor's leadership and both of you as my counterparts in the United States Senate. Let's show everyone that what we do in Texas is way different from any place else in the nation, that we come together around the unifying factor that we represent all of the people. Thank you, Mayor, for yielding to me, and thank you all for coming out this morning. This has been a very important session that I have learned and gained a lot from. And my commitment is that we do something and that we pass a very effective and powerful law. I yield back.
Thank you, Senator Cornyn. You asked for this meeting. You initiated this meeting. I'm going to give you the final word.
Well, Mayor, I won't belabor this meeting with many more comments, but just to say thank you. This is primarily a listening opportunity for Senator Cruz and myself and Congresswoman Lee. Of course, Senator Cruz and I have the privilege of representing all 29 million Texans, but Houston is one of the most exciting, vibrant, diverse, entrepreneurial cities in the world. And I was born in Houston, but so we're proud to be here. But let me just reiterate, Mayor, how much I appreciate your calm, steady hand during the challenges that our state and our nation has faced recently. This is just the latest. But we know we have an ongoing pandemic as well. And I think people of good faith can find that common ground and can build consensus. I know we get tugged by politics and other things that frequently defeat us from doing our best, but let's not make this one of those times. We didn't do it on the COVID-19 response, and we sure should not do it here. But I hear you loud and clear when you say we ask the police to do too much. We need to do more to deal with services that relieve the pressure on police, because they maybe help people once they get out of jail, out of prison, live law-abiding and productive lives. And that's something we've tried to do in the criminal justice reform arena. But if you don't have the follow-on services, I hear you loud and clear. Body cameras, training, transparency, screening police officers, those are all really terrific ideas. And Bishop Dixon, thank you for sort of raising our vision here and making it more aspirational. Dignify the outcry. I thought that was a really important message. People don't need to see us divided over instances like happened to George Floyd. They need to see us unified, because there's nothing to separate us. Shouldn't be. And then the idea of one family, one future. I love that idea as well. So thank you all for being here. Thank you for convening us, Mayor, and we'll take your ideas with us when we head back to D.C.
Thank you so very much. That's we'll bring it to an end for this session. I know I have another session senators were listening today. Later on today, I should be listening to a group of African-American young men voicing their views to their mayor. It is important that we listen, and we listen to those who have walked, demonstrated, and marched, who have, in large part, have brought us to this moment. And so I want to thank them. But I do want to say this. We have a tremendous community, good people in these communities. Simply they're asking to be seen, to be heard, and for transformation to take place in their communities. You don't reward peaceful protests by ignoring their concerns and their complaints. You don't reward them like that. If you want the city to remain peaceful, then we must be responsive. So you don't reward peaceful marching, demonstration, and protest by doing nothing. That's what I've said to our business community, and that's what I would say to all of us as elected officials. And then at the same time, let me just say this. I have 5,300 police officers in our city, and they are doing their job each and every day, sacrificing their lives every day. I don't want them to think at all that they are not appreciated, and that they are not needed, and that they are not loved. But the best way to honor police officers who sacrifice their lives every day, and that is to ease the pressure on them, to bring about the needed reforms, to make sure that we're holding those who go astray accountable, just like people hold us accountable as elected officials or others. And so if by working together, we can get it done. That's enough. Thank you so very, very much. Okay. I will shake your hand, Senator, but we'll just bump that. Thank you. Thank you. That was real good.